warm welcome to this new edition of the 4NewMobility Leadership Talk. Today's guest was Neil Frost, who is the founder and CEO of iSAHA, a company who is deeply involved in strategic advisory and standardization work, primarily related to ICT architecture and data management in the transport sector. Neil is a member of the International Organization of Standards, Technical Committee 204, Head of Delegation South Africa, and Convenor of Working Group 20 on AI and Big Data. And he's also expert to 6 working groups on intelligent transportation systems. Neil and his company have an incredible background, especially in public-private partnership projects in Africa, but also certainly beyond. In today's meeting, Neil puts us on a journey explaining the impact of AI on the future of mobility. And he provides us with an exciting perspective on opportunities for implementing transport technologies and services in Africa, leapfrogging what is currently already implemented in the world. So, again, welcome and enjoy. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning.
I hope you are fine. Everything okay?
Very good, thank you.
Now, wonderful to talk to you. I think we have the same time in the morning. You are in South Africa. I'm in Regensburg. It's wonderful to meet you.
And the same from you, and it's beautifully sunny in South Africa today, but cold because it's winter time.
Yeah. Now it's also a bit colder, thank God, in Regensburg. Yeah, so everything fine. So our topic today, Neil, is the impact, I would say, of deep learning, of artificial intelligence on mobility. And I'm very excited to learn from you what is the impact, what we can expect from this development, the opportunities. Maybe we also go a bit into some of the risks. So would you maybe like to start with giving us a bit of an insight in the context of your understanding? What is deep learning?
Deep learning is a process whereby we start to collect vast amounts of data, and that data enables the computers to start to generate patterns that they can deduct situations from. So the system begins to learn out of the creation of statistical databases as to certain outcomes that can be expected. And the more accurate the data becomes, the more accurate the actual process of learning and executing of algorithms becomes, which opens up that door for mobility and into transport, where you start to get into safety, you start to get into the utilizations of networks, and that is where your deep learning patterns really start to play a role in the process going forward. And you can see it already through a number of the predictions that you get on journey times and on maps showing you how you can traverse a city or a country to the most optimal time frame and distance based on deep learning, how the process has got to understand the congestion patterns. The actual live information coming in starts to show you those patterns, and that type of prediction comes through very clearly.
Can you expand a bit on the status? What are services which maybe today we already experience in our everyday life, which are also building on artificial intelligence and deep learning? Are there some examples?
There's some very clear examples. Obviously, the Google's map process, which one knows very well. The the various different applications for showing you how to traverse cities. I'm just trying to think of some of the names of these systems. They are all based on prediction analytics. They're all based on vast amounts of data coming in. And without us actually knowing in the mobility sector that we're actually utilizing deep learning and artificial intelligence, it's really part of our lives to a large extent. If you look into the future, you're starting to hear a lot about autonomous vehicles where you've got no drivers present in the vehicles. Those type of operations are beginning to come in from the futuristic point of view. You've already got motor vehicles that are, let's say, level 3, level 4 autonomous, where, yes, you've got to be behind the steering wheel, but largely they are driving themselves. That type of situation is coming in, and that is learning and detection, and your artificial intelligence is coming in. So a lot of the practical examples are more the utilization of maps and the movement around the city, whereas futuristic is coming into the autonomous vehicles, the robotics delivery systems that are coming in, where you've got, let's say, these quick deliveries from online shopping, where they actually deliver the goods to the house utilizing robotics. And that is changing the way that one looks at mobility to a large extent. It also has large implications on governance, and it will have large implications on policy and regulations. But that is outside of the technology space. That will be, let's say, a limiting factor to the speed of adoption of some of these technologies.
And where do you see currently that these technologies come fastest to the market? Is it equal globally, or are there some countries or regions where you would say they are really a bit faster in the adoption of these technologies?
I think there are certain regions. I think there are also certain cities that are faster to utilize some of this, to adopt some of this technology, especially some of the innovative areas. South Korea is a very good example of innovation in this space. I know there's cities in the UK and in the USA and in Europe that have already started to adopt some of this technology and to utilize it. The mapping and directional finding and prediction on wrong roads is probably more universal across the world. You can get access to these apps and have pretty good accurate data all over the world. However, the more advanced technologies are probably still limited to smaller pockets where they are largely on test because of possibly governance issues or regulations or requirements from an insurance point of view, who carries the risk, etc. I think there's also a lot of work that has to be done between your manufacturers or your OEMs and the ownership of data, the governance of data, who should have access, what should be public, what should be proprietary, because there's obviously a number of issues around the commercialization of this data. There's value in it. Now, who gets the right to be able to utilize that data and under what conditions? So there are a lot of issues that will come into this space, especially since artificial intelligence is driven largely on data, and therefore data ownership comes into it, data governance comes into it, data privacy laws come into it. So it's a difficult area to traverse. However, it's an area that is also fairly controversial because it comes up politically very often, but most people carrying a smartphone have already, let's say, forfeited a great deal of their privacy through the fact that you can be traced or can be watched wherever you're moving because of the connectivity of a smartphone. Because to be able to reach you on a single number they have to be able to detect where you are in the world. So your privacy issues and how you manage this data becomes a very, very important issue. And that is where you're going to see, or you have to see, a lot of standardization coming in. You're going to have to see a lot of policy issues coming in, and understanding as to how to utilize this data and who should have access and who should have commercial rights on some of this data.
But that is a topic now already, I think, for 20 years. Yeah. Do you see that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, yeah, that this issue can be solved? Or are there already some regions where you would say it is better solved than in other regions? Yeah, because the data access is already a long-standing topic and challenge, and also, I would say, barrier to many possible services.
I think that is the case. But if you look at the amount of work being done in various countries, the EU, the United States, into big data, the understanding of big data, the protection of the data systems, especially in the mobility space, there is advancement taking place, and I believe it will go through. It's just it is a slow process, and obviously one has to be extremely careful how one protects the integrity of the individual's data, especially if you cannot utilize the data unanimously, so that anonymously, so that you do not actually identify the individual. And it's that space between identifying or breaching the individual's rights to the utilization of data that becomes a very careful area that one has to manage very carefully and move through the minefield of how do you protect that data if it's there? How do you remove the association between the individual and the actual application that you are utilizing that data for? Because you need the data for a number of these things, but you don't, for example, on Google Maps, even although they're making use of a vast amount of GPS and vehicle tracking data that's coming in, they do not disclose which vehicle they are actually getting the data from. So you can see your vehicle on the map, but it does not get disclosed to the public unless you, for example, switch on a tracing application where you are broadcasting to a group of friends that this is where you're driving. There are apps like that, but that is something that you technically have to give approval to. Whereas if you're looking at the likes of these mapping applications, they don't disclose who they're getting that data from. They're just collecting that data and they're able to utilize it. So there are ways of having to get through it. You've just got to be very mindful of the various legislations and ways of conducting that data. And how do you collect that data? Because, for example, a motor manufacturer would like to know exactly where their motor vehicle is in case of a breakdown, in case of service history, in case of traveling statistics. They've got to be careful that they don't identify that vehicle with the owner of that vehicle, because if that information gets out, it can be seen as a breach of privacy. So it's those type of issues that are going to become a major part in how do we take data going forward.
I mean, you mentioned already the topic of standardization, yeah, and I know that you are heavily involved in the work concerning standardization. What is the role of standards in this on this topic? And maybe you can give us a glimpse of current standardization activities related to this topic.
At the moment, I'm, as you say, heavily involved in that. It's still a very early phase of the standardization process. The objective of standardization is largely around trying to ensure that you can achieve interoperability between systems so that you do not get a lock-in on technology, or you do not get a lock-in or of data that you have to, especially within governments and countries and so on, where you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel for every application because somebody's got you technologically locked in and can commercially or economically affect your, let's say, your whole economic cycle. So standardization is there to try and ensure that there is a certain level of adhered to, that there's a certain interoperability adhered to. For example, mobile telephones on a GSM system. If you did not have standardization across the world, your GSM networks would not function, and you would not be able to roam from country to country. That standardization has been defined by the standards organizations and adhered to by the OEMs. Now, in motor vehicles, there's a lot of standardization around certain items as well, so that you do not get that duplication. In your IT technologies and in intelligent transport systems, we strive to ensure that that integration is there so that there are more than one OEM that can supply a certain type of goods that can get you to give you the system that you're looking for. So and in AI, you're going to go in the same way. The more you bring in the intelligence between into these systems, the more you've got to make sure that you allow for multiple sources of these systems, but at the same time protecting the privacy of the individual. So it's a very complex area. It's a very political area, but it's also very it carries a lot of technology knowledge as well. So there's a mix of people that are very often involved in these processes, from highly sophisticated engineers to a bit more the people that understand the policies and the countries. Because, for example, in Europe, a lot of if you publish an ISO standard, it has to be, it's law that has to be implemented in the European countries. So you've got to make sure that that standard can function across all of those countries, plus all of the other member countries that participate in these standards. So there are a lot of issues in the standards, and if you start to see autonomous vehicles coming onto the roads, it's going to be vital that these vehicles can talk to each other, that they can identify each other. For example, if you're entering into a traffic signal intersection and you've got a whole, let's say you've only got autonomous vehicles, they need to be able to see which vehicle's coming in where, who do they give priority to, how do they move through this intersection. Now, if you don't have standards, that's not going to happen. So those are the type of topics that you have to look at fairly carefully. And organization like ISO TC 204 is working categorically on those type of topics and trying to see, how do you enter a traffic intersection? How do you allow a left turnout or a right turnout? You've really got the complication that in some countries you drive on the left-hand side of the road, and some countries you drive on the right-hand side of the road. So you enter into a traffic intersection, your rules sort of turn on their head again. So it's a complex area, and it's not only the operational process that you've got to look at, it's also the technology process. How do you now determine which of those have got the rights to move and not move?
I mean, I think it's a very complex topic, you're raising with autonomous vehicles and intersections, how they cross the intersections, and the different stakeholders maybe which we need in the future to make this happen in an efficient and safe way. Do you have an advice to companies who are working in this space? Do you see certain topics, which have to be addressed really to move forward quickly? I mean, it's not with autonomous mobility, we're not in a situation that it's not already taking place. I mean, we know in China, in the US, autonomous mobility is already taking place. But still, do you have advice to companies who are in this space, how maybe they should act or what they should avoid to be successful?
Obviously, companies want to be, let's say, in a large extent, leading or creating the standards for this. Now, there are very good examples of companies that have created the standard and they've capitalized on that standard, which has given them a commercial boost. So I would say any companies or OEMs should be encouraged to participate in standard operations that affect the developments that they're doing. I can't recall the actual name of it, but one of the mapping companies came out years ago where they started ISO TC204. And behind them, the people like Mr. Russ Shields and so on, they actually developed the standards that are now leading in mapping technology in a lot of your maps that are used on autonomous vehicles, etc. But it all comes from that initial start where that company led the way forward and was able to let's say, create the agenda and lead the way. Now, by companies, another example is Philips, who came out with your proximity device reading, wireless reading, your RFID tags, that standard between the tag and the reader was defined by Philips. And it's now the standard that manufacturers all over the world are using. You refer to that ISO MyFair standard. Sorry, excuse me. But that was clearly a Philips development at that stage, even although there were other leading examples of that out of Japan, for example, with their Felica, I think it's the Felica device. That eventually became part of the standard. Now that you're getting let's say your GSM or your smartphones talking to your readers, that interface has now brought those in. But before that, it was dominant MyFair only, and that was a Philips standard that was developed internationally and was able to be utilized by other manufacturers. So there is an advantage in a lot of cases to being, not necessarily being first, but participating in standards, because you can actually help guide or put those standards into place that your development is ahead of the actual standard coming out.
Now, Neil, I would like to allow you to dream a bit. Yeah, I mean, are there certain functionalities or services for the future which we can expect in the context of AI and mobility? Do you see maybe something on the further away horizon, where you say, oh, that is a service which have a major impact also on the welfare of people and nations, which maybe we don't have on our agenda at the moment?
Well, I think that if you start to dream and we don't, if you keep it to mobility, which is obviously our topic, I think we're going to see cities changing, because the denseness of cities is going to be changing. There's going to be a lot more robotic type operations where you will see delivery by robots or autonomous vehicles. You will see people utilizing autonomous vehicles. A lot of cities with public transport in place that is also becoming autonomous, driverless trains that are running in tube stations already. People are finding the need of ownership of the traditional motor vehicle is changing. And if you live in a city like New York, the expense of having parking facilities within the city for a motor vehicle is becoming horrendous. So a lot of people don't actually own a vehicle anymore. If they want to go away for a weekend and they need a vehicle, they will lease a vehicle or hire a vehicle from a company. So rental is going to be maybe a shift that you will see that's caused, whereas in the cities, You always get a lot more autonomous type operations. You always get a lot more driverless type operations taking place to get people around in the city. And I think you're going to see a change in the whole demographics and utilization of cities, because you very often get cities becoming the CBDs or the central business districts becoming empty in the evenings. So you've got a lot of wasted, let's say, square meterage that is not utilized. Now, AI is going to start to show you ways of being able to change those patterns by creating digital twin cities on simulators. You can start to simulate how to drive the economy and bring in a nighttime economy. What sort of businesses should you have there to attract people 24 hours a day in those areas, even if it's for entertainment, if it's for relaxation, if it's for work, rather than having people flock into an area, work from 8 until 4 or 8 until 5, and then flock out, and that area is dead. If by leaving it dead, you're leaving it open to criminality moving into that area, you're leaving it open to other, let's say, criminal type activities. Whereas if you can start to change that pattern, you're going to start to see a very dynamic city. Now, the only way to change that pattern is you've really got to understand that data. You've got to understand the movement of people. Are people staying in that area? Are they spending their money at night in that area? Are they spending all day in that area? Or are they largely moving out of, let's say, moving out of the suburbs into the CBD for work and then moving back into the suburbs? And how do you change that? The only way you're going to change that is by developing simulators and getting very accurate data. Now, with your video analytics that's available, with the advent of drones, it's no longer that expensive or prohibitive to be able to study these movements and study the movement of people. Now, as soon as you start to study that movement, you start to touch into the areas of artificial intelligence, you start to touch into the elements of pattern recognition, and you can start to see how to reorganize the mobility that you need around a city. However, if you start to really get into AI, because of pattern recognition, if you go into the health field, you can immediately see on an X-ray certain patterns, and artificial intelligence can augment the doctor and say, I believe with a 90% chance this is the diagnosis, and the radiologist or the specialist will confirm it or not confirm it. So it's starting to open up doors that we haven't seen. It will never replace the person, but it gives you tools to be able to make life more efficient, make life maybe more fun, and take away a lot of the boring work, because the computers can churn a lot of information that none of us can churn.
Yeah. Now, Neil, you're located in South Africa, yeah, but I know that your company is active globally, yeah. But what is the situation in South Africa or in Africa in the context of, in general, intelligent transport systems, yeah, the development and the deployment, but also in particular in the context of our topic of today, the impact of AI on mobility? How do you see the situation? How do you see the future?
I think if you're looking at Africa, Africa is very unique compared to, let's say, the European countries, in that Africa is short of infrastructure. So there is a large opportunity to leapfrog and get ahead of the curve with implementation. However, there's always the challenges of how do you address certain businesses that might exist? How do you bring business into the equation? You don't want to lose some of your entrepreneurs just by the fact that you introduce technology. You want to actually enhance their business. So you've actually got to understand the business once again. What is that curve that is going up? At what stage can you actually enhance those businesses by bringing in technology, rather than trying to force? Because if you try and force the technology onto the countries, you're going to have resistance, and you don't want that resistance. You want to be inclusive. So in the status in some of the larger cities in Africa, you will find that there is the deployment of intelligent transport systems. The opportunity to be able to deploy the latest systems is far greater because of new developments. We're not steeped in 100-year-old, 200-year-old cities that were designed for people walking and haven't got the space or the room for type of technologies that we are talking about. However, at the same time, you can't continuously just load motor vehicles onto roads. You've got to start to find more efficient ways because land is becoming more and more scarce. So there's always a balance in this. And yes, a lot of countries are leading the way. I know South Korea is definitely a very innovative country and likes to lead on this type of area. Some of your countries like China and so on are investing a lot of money into this, so are Japan. But equally, you will see a lot of investment in Europe and in America. The other countries, the emerging markets, will probably follow but not necessarily follow by having to take much notice of legacy systems, but follow from introducing new systems, rather than being leaders, but just because they don't have maybe all of the technology skills or budgets for the research that is required.
But is it then a fair understanding of what you're just saying, that maybe some countries which are followers in the context of the development of the technologies can be leader in the context of providing opportunities for deployment, because they don't have the legacy concerning the different technologies which are already on the market, but that there is an opportunity to deploy something like on a white paper. Is this what you are saying?
I think so, yes. I genuinely believe that the opportunity is there for forward-thinking countries, especially in the emerging markets, to deploy new technologies and open up the opportunity for new technology to be deployed and almost be utilized as test beds, because the infrastructure is not there. So you've got to think out of the box. A very clear example was in the 90s when the cellular telephones, the GSM technology, was introduced. In Europe, you were looking at a penetration of about 30% because of the existing infrastructure. In Africa, you're looking at a penetration of over 100% because they had no technology platform to work on. The cables didn't reach the people in the rural areas. So the business plans, when you try to look at what would be the penetration of a technology, for example, I think when we were working with the Europeans, we were saying you're only going to get a certain maximum market penetration. And that market penetration was somewhere 10, 20, 30 times too low to what it actually turned out to be once the technology got launched. And it was clearly seen throughout Africa. And that was due to the fact that in the European countries, in the developed countries, you already had cables, you already had copper connecting houses and people. In the rural emerging markets, you didn't have. So those sort of things you need to look out for and find ways to open the door. And in your transport sector, you're getting into that same space. You'll be far more reliant on the wireless type communications, on satellite connectivity in your mobility than European countries, for example, that have really got the infrastructure down the side of the road. We possibly don't have. So we'd be looking at putting up masts and utilizing satellites wherever possible. So those are the sort of differences between Africa and, let's say, or the emerging markets and the developed markets.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Neil. I think we can maybe close the interview at this stage. Yeah, I would like really to thank you for this interview, for this conversation. For me, extremely inspiring what I heard about the impact of deep learning, AI on mobility, especially in the context of smart cities. I also found it extremely interesting to learn about the difference in the context of deployment opportunities in the future with respect to maybe a bit more developed and maybe emerging markets. I think that is something where companies should have an eye on. So thank you very much, Neil, for this interview, and I wish you a good continuation of the day. Thank you, Neil.
A big pleasure. Thank you very much, Edmund. Have a good day.